If you've ever found your knitting looking like this, where you have all these bars or ladders stretching one side of your column of stitches from the other, chances are what happened is that a stitch accidentally fell or dropped off your needle. Now this can seem like somewhat of an unsettling sight, but there is a really easy fix for this. All you're going to need is a crochet hook to help you out. So you want to go to the bottom of where your stitches stop dropping, and you just want to put your crochet hook through that very last stitch that hasn't been dropped yet. So I'm just going to grab it by inserting my hook from the front to the back. Now when you're picking up stitches on stockinette stitch on the right side, you want to have your stitch in front and all those bars or ladders that are going to be picked up in back. And so you want to start on the closest, furthest down ladder, and I'm going to grab it with the hook, and then I'm going to kind of slightly turn my hook to make it easier to pull through the previous stitch, and there I've taken it up one row. So I'm going to do the same thing again, where I grab my next bar, pull it through the stitch, and bring it up a row. So you kind of work your way up all these bars, one ladder at a time, all the way to the top. And you do the same exact way for that very last bar. And then you place your stitch back on your working needle. When you place it, you want to make sure that right leg of the stitch is in front and the left leg is in back when you're looking at it. That way your stitch is mounted correctly for you to continue knitting across your row. And you can see it's like my dropped stitch never happened. If you've had a stitch drop on the purl side of stockinette stitch fabric, you have a couple options. The first is you can turn your work over, or if you're working in the round, you can turn it inside out, and then work just like before, where we learned how to pick up dropped stitches on the knit side of stockinette stitch fabric. But sometimes that is a little bit more difficult if you're working on something like a larger sweater or something where you can't easily turn it inside out. And there is another way that you can pick up that dropped stitch, again by using your crochet hook. Now what you're going to do is essentially work the same steps as you did for the knit side of stockinette stitch fabric, but mirrored or backwards. So you can kind of see I have 1, 2, 3 bars here, and then I'm able to find my little stitch here that hasn't dropped down yet. I'm going to pull that stitch so I can easily find it again. And the trick for the purl side of stockinette stitch fabric is that you want to have your bar or ladder close to you or in front of the stitch as opposed to behind it. Also, we're going to go through the stitch from the back to the front, so your stitch is coming toward, your hook is coming towards you. And then I'm going to grab that ladder and just pull it through my stitch. Now you're going to have to kind of pause, remove your hook, take the next ladder, bring it to the front, and then you kind of pull up your next stitch, and again you want to go through that stitch from back to the front or towards you, and then you want to grab that next ladder or bar and pull it away from you through the stitch. So I'm going to do that one more time for my last bar here. I'm going to bring it from the back to the front, then insert my crochet hook from the back to the front coming towards me. Then I'm going to grab my bar and pull it away from me through the last stitch. And then again, I'm just going to insert it over my working needle in the same way where the leg of my right side is in front and the left side is in back. And that way you're set up to purl across your row again, and your dropped stitch is totally invisible. You can never tell that it happened. And if you flip it around, you have a nice stockinette stitch fabric on the knit side as well. Picking up a dropped stitch in garter stitch is actually the most involved of the 3 techniques. Now, a little backstory as to why that is. If you're familiar with circular knitting, you know that it takes knitting one row, purling one row to create the same garter stitch that you do by just knitting when you're working back and forth. And since we're working from just one side when we're picking up our dropped stitches, we're going to do that same technique where we're alternating between working from the purl side and working from the knit side. And so you're again going to notice that you have bars stretching across your stitches here. And you're going to again grab your trusty crochet hook to help you out. And you're going to follow down the bars until you find that one stitch that is still intact. Now this is the stitch that's going to take a little bit of closer examination, and that's going to let you decide whether your next bar you have to pick up like we did on the purl side where it's in the front, or like the knit side where our bar is in the back. So if we take a close look at this stitch here, you can kind of see that it follows this line, and you can see that it got pulled from the back to the front of this stitch below it. That means if it's from the back to the front, it was picked up as if you were working on a knit side. That means that your next row is going to be worked as if we were on the purl side. So we're going to take our bottom little ladder here, put it in front of our dropped stitch. I'm going to insert my hook coming towards me or from back to front, and then I'm going to take that bar, pull it through the stitch, and I've picked up one row of my garter stitch. And now my crochet hook is inserted in my stitch as if I'm going from front to back, and my ladder is behind my stitch here, so it's actually all set up to go pick up that next ladder as if you were working from a knit row. So I'm going to grab that bar, and then you just pull it towards you. So now that I've worked as if I had a knit side stitch, I'm going to alternate back to the purl side. So I'm going to remove my hook, move that last little loop here in front of my dropped stitch, and then I'm going to take my crochet hook once again and put it through the loop coming towards me or from the back to the front, and then I'm going to grab the last loop and pull it away from me through the stitch. And then you place your stitch back on your needle in the same way where the right leg is in front, the left leg is in back, and your stitch will be mounted correctly to continue working across your row and garter stitch. And you can see that you were able to pick up all your stitches in garter stitch, and it looks correct on both sides. And that's how you work a dropped stitch when you're working with garter stitch.